If you're not engaging with AI at your business, you're behind. If you're not having a code red or having a holy shit moment, you're not paying attention. And I think there's going to be massive resistance and chaos. And meanwhile, the technology will advance. Hi, I'm Andy Sack, co-CEO and co-founder of Forum 3 and also co-author of AI First, a playbook for future-proofing your business and brand. My background, I'm a career technologist. I started in internet companies in the 90s, became a venture capitalist during Web 2, and now during the AI era, I'm back to my entrepreneurial roots with my dear friend, Adam Brotman.
I'm Adam Brotman. I am the other side of the of all the things Andy just said, co-CEO, co-founder, and co-author of our company Forum 3 and our book AI First. My background is I was chief digital officer of Starbucks for most of my career, also the president of J.Crew. And I love consumer brands in the intersection of digital technology and brand building. And that's what Andy and I are working on, both on our company Forum 3, but also with our book AI First.
AI First. For folks who aren't familiar with the book, who aren't familiar with your work, can you tell us what's the premise of the book? What's your core argument?
Premise of the book AI First is trying to answer the question of what does it actually mean to be an AI first company when Gen AI really just kind of hit us a few years ago and is moving super fast. We all knew and came to know what it meant to be a digital first company and then a mobile first company. But none of us, including Andy and I, supposed digital thought leaders and digital transformation experts, had any idea what it would mean to be an AI first company. So we actually researched that question by talking to some of the world's leading AI lab leaders, as well as business experts. And the premise of the book basically says AI first companies start with AI first leaders, that you need to understand that this is a co-intelligence tool, not just, don't think of like your parents' AI. Think of this as a completely different way of augmenting how you make better decisions faster as an individual leader, as well as how you integrate it into everything you do as a company. And as a result of that insight, we developed a playbook in the book that actually tries to, in a future-proof way, irrespective of how fast and powerful the AI is and all the new things that are going to happen, allows business leaders to get their whole company to understand that insight that I just mentioned about how this is like an Ironman suit, that this is about individual co-intelligence, and then allows them to integrate it and scale it within their organization. And that's essentially the arc of the book and the essence of what we came up with in the book.
I usually let Adam go first so that I can chime in and have at the end with the succinct version. The premise of the book is AI is a holy shit moment. Brace yourselves, all of us, for the speed of development of AI, and you need a playbook. And so we developed the playbook by talking to lots of smart people.
So the playbook second, you mentioned something, Adam, I want to come back to, which is the leader. How do you define kind of an AI forward leader? What are the behaviors, habits, routines, et cetera, that are called for the quintessential AI first leader? What's it look like?
It starts with a mindset. So it's less about like individual specific actions, but a leader, particularly the CEO of a company. Let's say that we talk about that a lot in the book, that it actually has to start at the very top of the organization, that the leader is encouraging the company to have that holy shit moment that Andy just mentioned, and that everybody has to internalize just how powerful and fast moving and dynamic and sometimes jagged this technology can be. So people need to get their hands on it. They need to be curious. They need to be willing to experiment. And that has to come from the top, as opposed to, some set of rules or, typical technology implementation training. This is much more about experimentation and a mindset and a willingness to sort of keep trying things and figure out what works and what doesn't. And that will lead to an AI first culture and rewiring of how people do things. How much do you think that people are actually following the playbooks? And I'm asking because we've done a bunch of interviews now with people from companies that are considered like pretty advanced in what they do. And the feeling we get is that everybody's just getting started. And that some, like talk about like, they have 80% of, their staff using it, stuff like that. But if you ask, I think it was the CEO, or the founder of Sabia, we asked him like, how far do you think you are in your journey from 0 to 10? He's like, we're probably a 3. And you like, compared to everybody else, they were probably like a 9.
Who did you ask that question of?
Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier.
Oh,
Yeah. And I think, he's like, obviously like a paranoid founder. So probably like there's some elements of that. But it does seems that a lot of people kind of like are not really getting kind of like the effect that they think they can get out of it yet. Yes, that
I mean,
first question, is that a
Henrik,
fair statement? Yeah.
he called a code red. I don't know, Andy and Adam, if you're familiar with what Wade and his team have done at Zapier, but they declared a code red where they told everybody take a week off work and do a deep dive. To your point, Adam, I think a AI first leaders got to start by kind of hitting the alarm bell. I think most organizations though don't feel it's a code red moment if they're honest. The vast majority of organizations go, that seems a bit excessive. I mean, I was talking to a CEO yesterday who said, I don't want to alarm people. That was actually his verbatim quote.
I think that's right. I mean, it goes back, I think, to the jagged frontier of and the relativism of the deployment and usage of AI, which is, I don't know, Wade's probably right. He's probably at a 3 in his journey, and in his mind, because he has an understanding of how fast the technology is moving and how significant of a change in the world and business for his business, total digital business, he's probably at a 3. And that's calling a code red and saying, take a week off. And the number of CEOs who have declared code red is probably 2 or 3% of the hundreds that we've spoken to. You talk to somebody else who's in in the professional sports business, they own a baseball team, the Seattle Mariners, let's say, and, they don't want to upset their employees, and no, it's not going to really affect marketing. And like, yeah, I kind of want some training, and it's not, for them, it's just different, right? Like
Make the case, Andy, for the Mariners. Get specific. Why is it an existential moment, or is it okay for them to say, we don't have anything to worry about?
I mean, I make the case. I mean, in my opinion, I really wanted to call the book The Holy Shit Moment. The first chapter is called The Holy Shit Moment. In the podcast, I talk a lot about the holy shit moment. What is an AI first CEO? Because I think an AI first CEO is different than it has different skills and succeeds in different ways than the CEO of 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it's ones that have had the AI holy shit moment. And it's like, it is Wade. I mean, I think that the book can be summarized, if you were trying to take away from the book, is holy cow. This is an era of advancement, kind of like we've been through before in the industrialization era, et cetera. But this is going to happen in such a compressed time. And it is now. It's the next 2 to 3 years. And if you're not on the bus, you're behind. So the case for the Mariners would be, this is going to affect every aspect of the way in which your fan base decide whether or not to attend a baseball game. If they do decide to attend a baseball game, their entire customer experience is going to be affected by their interaction. And there's an opportunity to personalize the experience for the type of fan that they are in ways that have never before been possible. You should start experimenting with AI and changing the way in which that customer experience, the way in which customers experience the Mariners.
So this word experimenting is a word that we hear a lot. And when you talk about playbook, or you use the word playbook, that the book is a playbook, can you talk for a second about what are the mechanisms? We understand the value of experimentation broadly in innovation, even pre-AI. What does it look like to create mechanisms for experimentation, permissions, resourcing, et cetera, to How do you define success? What are you measuring, et cetera, et cetera?
In the book, we talk about this from the perspective of, and kind of a boring word, but governance. So you don't, it's funny, Andy and I are not big on like committees and bureaucracy and policies and governance. Those are not words that particularly my friend Andy likes, and I don't like them either. And
He doesn't strike me as a governance,
No.
as a governance evangelist. Yes.
no, but
That came across that quickly, Jeremy.
I'm a little slow.
But one of the things we realized in writing the book and talking to everybody was that, wow, and this is we've never had this thing called intelligence as a service. Like, it's such a weird concept because it's like the closest thing we ever had to are human beings. And so the more that we realize that this is like spinning up in some way human beings to like help you, how do you make sure that you're like, you would never just willy-nilly just hire people with no job descriptions and no tasks and no management, and like all of a sudden governance becomes like critical, like in a world. However, when it comes to using AI, you can't just have, you don't want to, there's both defensive and offensive. You don't, on the defensive side, you just don't want people running around like chickens with their head cut off, like doing stuff that's going to like give up secure information. Like, there's no actual like learnings that are being sort of tracked and organized to sort of push yourself forward. And on the other hand, you don't want to be like so fearful and so disorganized that you're like missing out on how fast things are moving, how you could actually totally reinvent and improve speed of decision-making, quality of decision-making, improve customer experiences, improve marketing effectiveness. Like, so how do you balance that? And we realize like, yeah, a company needs, for lack of a better analogy, a vehicle to sort of put the company in and take them to the promised land here at a speed and in a way that makes sense, but is also smart. And so we realized, oh yeah, you got to have like a task force or a council or a AI champions team that is actually keeping up with this stuff and actually can actually, when GPT-5 comes out last Thursday, can play with it and can have an intelligent conversation about, oh, look, it does this better, but this is worse. And I wonder if this is a good opportunity to use Gemini instead. And where are we on our AI use policy around Gemini instead of ChatGPT team? And what about like, this agent thing that just came out on GPT-5, like, oh, is this smart to connect to our data? But yet we want to experiment with agents in other ways. Like, if you ask a regular person who's not AI proficient, that's not keeping up with this stuff, like that just is like, what goes right over their head. And so you need a group of people that understand the business you're in, understand like what you're trying to achieve, understand your customers, really understand your customers, understand your customer experience and like your brand and your business model, but also understand AI enough that they can connect those dots and sort of make sure that you have a responsible, but yet proactive way of adopting AI. And so experimenting in that context from that group makes all the sense in the world. It's like Andy's always good at talking about comparing science labs in science to businesses. And like, you need like a lab, right? That you could sort of play with these things and experiment and learn. It's responsible.
Can I ask you a little bit on the lab thing? Because one of the things that I think there's kind of like two types of organizations. There's the ones that are kind of just getting started. They're getting the play group. They're setting up like the champion. They have like, like they're following the playbook. They should read the book. Then I think that there are people who kind of been doing a lot of that stuff, and they are starting to kind of like understand some of the subtleties of AI in organization. And so they might say, hey, as I'm doing this, I'm realizing that the organizational structure that we have right now might not be the one that should be there once we kind of like really starting to use AI. And so I'll give you an example. Maybe you can use that as, I had somebody call me the other day. He's the CEO of a big company. And he said, I really need somebody to help me do social media that knows a lot about AI. And I kind of like was struggling a little bit coming up with a name for him until I kind of realized that it isn't really just somebody who can use Midjourney that he was asking for. He was asking for somebody who could help him kind of re-architecture what marketing looks like in an age of AI, which is not a social media manager, which is something different, which would have the issue that if that reported into the normal CMO kind of like organization structure, probably would fail because it wasn't just about adding another headcount. It's about rethinking basically how you were doing the day-to-day work. And so I guess the question is, the more advanced that you get with the organizations that you advise and what you see, how much do you think that we need to re-architecture some of the organizational design? Or do you think that we can basically just redo the plumbing with AI?
I mean, this goes right at the heart of innovators' dilemma. I'm a big believer that AI, the speed of the advancement of AI absolutely is going to change the structure of our world, the businesses, and our lives. And so the notion that we're going to have marketing departments that look like the way they look like today in 2 years is, it's why you should have a holy shit moment and get on it, because it's going to look totally different. Again, the things, I'm sure you guys saw it. You saw the Kelce ad that played during the NBA finals. I mean, the notion that one guy did that in less than 2 days is they add. So what are the ad? That ad is incredible. If you haven't seen it and you're listening to this, check out the Kelce ad, type in Kelce NBA finals and you'll find it. What are the skills that are required to do that? There's a visioning of the output. There's skills with the AI tools and then there's rapid iteration. And that I find I struggle with this rapid iteration skill, because you just got to keep trying it and Adam and I were talking this morning, when you try it the first time, it's non-deterministic. The second time you do it, it's different.
Totally.
And
Even
yet
the same
that
thing.
tool, that there's an impulse there. So I think that organization structures within companies, of existing companies, it's why the Ethan Mollick chapter, the last chapter in the book, I think it's why we did an epilogue to the book, because we realized that Ethan and he was telling us in that chapter when we did that interview, he's like, oh guys, your playbook's really nice and all, but it's kind of out of date, and you're not pushing business leaders far enough into the future. It's going to be out of date on the day the book is published. And we got off the call and we're like, were we just chastised by Ethan? And we kind of were, and he was kind of right. And it's because he was saying that you need to be thinking about the next when he chastised us. I don't even know whether certainly VO3 wasn't out, and I don't know that O3, the reasoning models, were out.
Absolutely not.
And
it was we talked to them in September or around then, and they didn't come out till December.
So long story short, organizational structures are going to change radically. I do believe there's going to be a bunch of small 5-8 person teams doing the work that 200-person teams do.
So would
today.
you start that already? I mean, there's two ways of thinking about what you do today if you're the chief innovation officer or whatever the title is that's responsible for this. You can either say, I'm going to try to upgrade everybody. I'm really going to just make myself kind of AI first, right? The other one, which you've seen some people doing, is what I think of as replatforming, where they kind of go, this won't work. I'll have to basically rebuild, but kind of rebuild on an AI stack, on AI philosophy. And so I chopped the team basically down, and then I built from that. Where are you in those things?
Henrik, remember what we heard from John Waldman? I mean, one of our previous guests, CEO of Homebase, he mentioned how his board was instructing him to be hiring unemployed people for 2 reasons. 1, they have the bandwidth to be reskilling. 2, they have categorical evidence from the market that their current skill set's insufficient. And I think it speaks a little bit to Henrik's question about how much effort should we invest in, call it upskilling, reskilling, et cetera, versus where do we just need to start over?
So let me give you a couple of thoughts on this. So number one is, we wrote about this in the book a little bit, and I'm going to draw some parallels to when I was named chief digital officer at Starbucks, and there was really no such title. And we talked about this in the book, and I'm not comparing the AI first wave necessarily to the mobile first wave that I was sort of dealing with on the backs of the digital, computerization and internet wave 1. I think this is different. I think this is more of a code red, as you said. And I think we make that point in the book. And I think that if you tried to I personally don't think a code red means burn it all down and reorganize right now. I actually think that you could, like, that would be ambitious. But I think that you might find yourself in sort of a Klarna situation where you have that instinct to do, and I don't know the Klarna details, but I'm just following what I've read. And I actually really admire a lot of the stuff he was saying. But I feel like you'll end up cartwheeling over the finish line if you call it code red and you don't really understand that, like, it takes time for an organization, particularly any sort of sizable organization, to rewire itself. And you're running a real business, and it's easy to sort of say something like, "Oh, we need to like burn it all down and rewire everything." I do think you will eventually need to do that on some level, but it's like we said before, you have to like give yourself a way to do that. And so what we say now, what we would recommend is, yes, you call a code red. You call a code red from your CEO that like, this is different. This is going to change much faster and come at us much faster than any other technology. And it's different than any other technology. And we're going to have to start rewiring things. But if we try to like do that across the board right now, we would end up in a situation where like you just wouldn't be able to get your daily work done, even if it was augmented by AI. So you got to like find a pace and an arc to do that. We recommend call a code red from the top, so to speak. Get people AI literate across the organization, create academies, create a license for people to use AI in a safe, secure, responsible way, and like get a core group of people that are going to really invest themselves in like staying at the edge of this stuff, that are going to like kind of recommend how your organization should make these changes. I don't think it's like, for example, unless your head of HR or your CEO is like that AI proficient, like who's going to make the decisions to like rewire everything? You could say, well, the functional leader in marketing is going to do it. Well, like, okay, or she or he, are they on that council? Are they up to speed? Like, now they do need to do that in the next few years, which is pretty amazing that I'm saying that. But I just would say, be careful about like declaring things, and just because you could end up in a situation where you have to like, roll it back on some levels. And I'm a big fan of like doing it in a somewhat organized, even if urgent manner.
So you're a CEO, you declare a code red, and I'm speaking right now from an observation I have with a multinational enterprise that has appointed an AI committee or council. I think you said task force, right? They've got champions. My observation is, unless it's delicately managed in terms of permissions, expectations, accountability, et cetera, the task force can actually just become the bottleneck. It's, oh, people are waiting. Well, let's see what the task force says about XYZ. How do you make sure, from a kind of structural perspective, going back to Henry's question about org design, how do you structure the task force so that they accelerate your learning rather than rate limit your learning?
Yeah, the task force and the AI policy should accomplish what you just said. It should accelerate. So if you think about how to implement our playbook, and I'll explain in it, because who knows how to implement our playbook, and explain it. You have to sort of give permission to the organization to use generative AI across the board. I'm talking about everybody at some level. Like don't just like roll out a co-pilot chat button and don't tell anyone what to do with it and how it can be used. And that's why I say that it starts with the CEO. CEO should be saying to the whole organization, like, this is a powerful new technology. I encourage you all to use it. We have a policy. We have a task force to help you. Like, they're there to help you think about prioritization of pilots and, any other office hours and training that you need, and thoughts. And they're going to administrate our policy. If you have any questions about, can you use Notebook LM? Can we use Gemini? What's our core tool? Like, how do I learn more about this? How do I get more involved? Like, the task force is there to facilitate, not be a gatekeeper. And it has to be a message from the top that everybody should be using this and playing with it in a responsible way. And then the task force is there as sort of an engine to make sure people can answer their questions, to make sure they're not just like all over the place. And then that's sort of the combination that allows an organization, if it wants to have everybody moving forward. That it's sort of a delicate needle to be thread, but the task force is not a gatekeeper. And the use policy, you could say the same thing. Well, use policy is going to tell me what I can and can't do. Like, that's why you got to craft a smart use policy. But a good counsel, a good AI leader, like within the organization, is gonna make sure that all of this has the opposite effect, that it's actually meant for everybody to be freely using it. I mean, Andy and I, when we talk to leaders, one of the first questions we ask is, how often are you using AI? Like, which AI are you using? How many times a day are you using it? Like, when we start talking to them, why have you run that through AI? Like, I actually think one of the core questions that will happen all the time in the next year, that's a sign of an AI first organization, is when a leader says to their team, like, I just expect that you will have run this through Claude, Grok, Gemini, ChatGPT at a good thinking, reasoning level before you've come to me with some thoughts or an answer to a question.
Right. Failure to leverage every tool available to you will be considered professional malpractice.
On the playbook, if you were just like listing down the chapters, is that like feasible to do, just to kind of give people listening in kind of like what are the elements, and so they can kind of go either I already thought about that, or this is something I need to read up on?
The arc of the book is, it starts out with Andy and I talking about our meeting with Sam Altman and our holy shit moment. And as Andy mentioned, it was kind of the title of the intro chapter is called The Holy Shit Moment, that was all about like, wow, these guys are going after AGI, artificial general intelligence. They're moving much faster than we thought, with a goal to have this kind of concept of very powerful AI in the next 5 years. And we didn't realize how fast their ambitions were. And then that led us to a chapter with Reid Hoffman where he was explaining, the Ironman suit effect of this. This is about like micro use cases, individual use cases, 10xing the individual functional leader. Then we talked to Bill Gates about productivity, and really about like, if you're going to get that level of productivity, it's not just going to be quantitative, it's going to be qualitative, and what the two dimensions of productivity between qualitative and quantitative, and like how important it is to understand that. And then we, talked to Mustafa Suleyman, who was not yet the CEO of Microsoft, but was coming off of his time from being a Google DeepMind co-founder, and really thinking about what does the next 3 or 4 years look like in terms of the speed of change of this technology, and how it would, like we just talked about, like how will it affect marketing? How will it affect org design? How will it affect the attention economy? And so that was sort of the beginning arc of the book. And then we stopped in the middle of the book and we said, wait a minute, because we wrote, this is an unusual book. We didn't have an outline. We just wanted to literally document our learning journey. And then we stopped and we had a chapter where we just said, let's put this all together and start talking to business leaders about how they're using it. And so then we started talking to like the CEO of Suzy.com. We talked to Saul Kahn from the Khan Academy. And we talked to the head of AI at Moderna, who had led an absolutely literally a casebook, textbook case study on how to adopt our AI threat. They have 80% adopt, every day.
Was that Bryce you were talking to?
Bryce Chalama.
Yeah, I was such a huge fan of his.
Yeah. So we talked to Bryce, we talked to Saul Kahn, we talked to Matt Britton from Suzy, all in an effort to who are the leaders out there that get it and that have actually succeeded at infusing AI into the culture, into the mindset. And they were those AI first leaders. And then based on all that arc, we ended up talking about the playbook, and then ended up talking to Ethan Malik and said, how do we do? And as Andy said, he said, you didn't go far enough.
Can I ask a kind of odd question? When sometimes you talk to people, there's a thing that you feel they don't say. Did you have a sense after talking to all these very smart people who is probably as kind of aware of what's going on as anybody else? What was the unspoken thing?
I have an answer to that because I've as we've done the book tour, we've been asked a similar question. Safety. Nobody talks about safety. It's not in all of those conversations. And it's easy. I fall into this as well. I'm enthralled by the pace, the capability set of what AI enables, the organizational structure, all of that stuff. Super interesting, intellectual fodder, but safety.
Do you think you can do both? I mean, and I ask because that I'm currently in Europe, where everybody's trying to regulate themselves into innovation, right? And the US obviously is amazing because you guys are literally the Wild West people that are we'll figure it out. How
ready,
do you,
fire, aim. Yeah.
How is it kind of like just like an impossible challenge to say we'd like to move as fast and try to get to AGI, but we also want safety? Is that doable?
You know, um, I think early on, a number of people recognized that this was not technology, this was alien intelligence, and the capability set of the tool that is powered by technology, I guess, and that the power of the tool conceivably represents an existential threat to humanity. And so I don't know what you do with that. Humans aren't great. Like the capitalist system's doing what it does, which is a bunch of very smart, hungry business people at probably 6 to 8 companies are attracting capital and deploying it and going as fast as they can.
One thing that might stop it, I guess, I'll say it as a statement, but I mean as a question. So I had an op-ed in Washington Post yesterday about what I thought was kind of like a positive use of AI, right? Like as we talked about in your podcast, like how do you democratize access to entrepreneurship with AI? And the comments, there was like 600 comments, and most of them didn't seem to have like read the piece, but you could just feel like an immense anger and immense fear, right? It was all about, yes, but it's going to polarize all wealth. Yes, it's going to like, it's just very worried. And then I see like the Duolingo people put something on LinkedIn where they are excited about something done with AI, and the comment track is just like, I'm canceling. This is just because you want to make more money. You don't care about people. There's like a lot of like what I said is like anger and deep fear. And then I think there are people like us that do these podcasts where we talk about all this stuff and we're like, yeah, but it's awesome. Do you think that that kind of like what I would see as brewing resistance or brewing fear or brewing kind of like attention to kind of things that could go wrong might in some way kind of create that kind of like break effect to all this? Or will that just be kind of like pushed to the side and people go like, let's just go.
I think it'll be pushed to the side. I mean, it'll brew up and be chaos, and it'll be like, I'm sure you listened to the Diary of CEO, that recent part. I thought that was an excellent podcast in which he talked about the 5 to 15 years of chaos and then tried to make the case for utopian. I'm sort of on that, like, like we're in it. It's the bus has left the station. If you're not engaging with AI at your business, you're behind. If you're not having a code red or having a holy shit moment, you're not paying attention. And I think there's going to be massive resistance and chaos, and meanwhile the technology will advance.
Did you guys see there was a Harvard report that just came out where they studied the human evaluation of work, and it was the same underlying work, and then the question was whether an evaluator thought that it was human generated or human plus AI generated. And the worst evaluations were given to human and AI generated work by the least likely to adopt the AI. So, which is to say, the less likely someone is to adopt AI, the more harsh they are to be towards AI adopters. And in many cases, these are the middle managers. And they were harshest, by the way, towards women and minorities. When they perceived that a woman was using AI, they were much harsher. When they perceived that a minority was using AI, they were using it much harsher. They evaluated the same underlying output much more harshly and questioned the competence.
They knew who was making the output.
That was the experimental condition. Same output, but then they told the evaluator, this is human only output by a man. This is human only output by a woman. This is human and AI output by a man, human and AI by a woman. And consistently, the least experienced people who often are in positions of giving promotions, of approving work, etc., were most harsh towards
They were
AI.
testing for a bias in this AI context, AI helper context, or AI assisted context. Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me in the sense of that's been going on before AI, now with AI, to your point. Like but getting back to, I agree with Andy that I mean, I do think we can draw comparisons to the internet in some ways. So like when the internet really, I mean, we're old enough to remember all this stuff. At least I am. And
I'm not.
The internet causes a lot of problems like today, like social media and fraud and scams. And so there's this weird thing that we've experienced, and it just gets more powerful, right? Computers to internet to cloud, mobile to now AI, where like it's the same mixture of like, A, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. B, there's real concerns, right? Andy's exactly right. Like the whole time we were talking to folks, we'd get done with the discussion and we'd say, yeah, there was really not a discussion of like safety, or like, why are they building these things if they don't know what's going to happen? And there just needs to be, I mean, talking about society, you're talking about even just like displacement and disruption. And there's not a ton of, so in other words, this industry is happening and these tools are out there. And I do think it's similar to the internet in the sense of like, yeah, there's a dark side to this and there's problems and we need to be doing more.
Do you feel that this is very much, we talk about safety, we often talk about the foundational models. And then I'll give you a little backstory. I was part of like the early social web also, right? And so I remember being at Social Food Camp, like where everybody who was building social platforms were, and all the founders of companies that now then became well known were kind of hanging out. And there was not a lot of discussion about safety there because we were taking pictures of our lunch and putting them, in a feed, and we were like, what's the worst that can happen? Then obviously, a whole generation's mental health kind of got washed away in the process. When we talk about safety and you talk to all these CEOs, obviously they can't change the foundational models. But I wonder if there's something they can do to address the element of safety just in the way that they are conducting themselves with the use every day in their organizations.
CEOs of the labs or CEOs of everyday companies?
No, I don't have an answer for it. So like, I'm not sure that there is, but I just wondering, we talk about safety and then we kind of like look at these 8 companies and go like, you should fix it. And then like in Europe, we look at the government saying, oh, you should fix it. Like I wonder like if there is the introspective.
Is there safety on the edge as opposed to the center?
Yeah. Like what would we do there, right? Is it our responsibility? We earlier asked the question, like, should we basically just kind of find new people that if the old ones don't want to be upgraded? Is part of the safety is to say, well, actually, no, it's your responsibility to kind of like make sure that people get along on the ride. Like those kind of questions. I mean, like, I don't hear them that often. So
it's a good question. I haven't thought about it. My knee-jerk reaction to it is that really, it is about the large language models. It's not about the user at the end, the CEO and the policies, et cetera. It's about the capability set of the set of tools. And really the debate is about open source versus closed. And where does ethics and safety fall in the responsibility? And today, because AI is such a profound step forward in terms of its capability set to solve problems that humans can't, for the good, as we might actually solve cancer, we might solve Alzheimer's, we might solve fusion. Like it's being talked about as a potential breakthrough in all of those domains. The underbelly of all of that is that technology could be used for lots of not well-intentioned things. And when you have a geopolitical debate about what is intention, and just because the US says one thing and Germany, which are 2 countries that are closely aligned, it gets really complicated really quickly in the world. And so like open source versus closed source is really a challenging question.
And I think that's actually one that I don't hear a lot of the US discussing about. My co-founder at Autos and co-author of the book, Nicholas, he was in Bhutan last week. And one of the questions you get there, like from a group of high schoolers is, so what do you use, OpenAI or DeepSeek? Like that's like the first question, right? And then obviously, he's like, what do you mean? Like I use OpenAI. I wonder how much of like a lot of like the world politics also will kind of like then be influenced by the question that you're just posing, open source versus closed, but also just where does
safety is just being tossed. It's not top of mind. It's not given what's at stake, the prize that is perceived at stake, geopolitically and capital wise, it's safe to be damned.
One thing that I would love to revisit is this question about both leadership and organizational structure in regards to the playbook. You had mentioned Sama, and one of the things that I've wondered about is to what extent is this about AI first versus call it agility, for lack of a better word? And the reason I ask that is I think AI first has certain connotation, but when I talk to my friends at OpenAI, for example, the hallmarks of their culture aren't, they are using AI for everything. Everyone's using AI for everything. So that's a non-negotiable. As Brad Anderson said on the podcast recently, every person in every function every day. Okay, granted. But when I look at the way they are making decisions at OpenAI, it's about being clear about one-way versus two-way doors. It's classic Amazon kind of thought process, right? They're clear on meetings must be valuable. They're clear. There's no email. They do everything via Slack. There's literally zero email in the company except with outsiders, right? And so to me, those aren't necessarily AI solutions. They're organizational decisions around agility, velocity, pushing decision-making down, et cetera. How much of this is AI catalyzing the necessity of agility versus AI bringing in a new concern, consideration, et cetera?
I mean, I think I understand your question. I'll try it for a second. Andy, jump in. We wrestled with the title AI first because we were purposely trying to we asked the question, like, what does AI first even mean before we knew the answer? And then we ended up with an answer that it's about human in the middle. Like it's 10xing, it's the human, it's the Ironman suit for the human. It's still Tony Stark in the Ironman suit. And at the end of the day, that's how I think of it. I think Andy and I think of it as like, it is about like, you're sort of going through your day and now you have this like always on augmentation tool that's at your disposal. You're going to use it a lot and you're going to actually rewire the way that you make decisions. And it's going to get weird because we talk about this in the book, like when agents and we have agentic things that we do with AI now, like even thinking models are somewhat agentic just on their face. And then you've got these things called agents, but that's a really misused and overly used term. But at some point, there's going to be agents that are like trusted, autonomous, capable, maybe even super intelligent agents. And I don't think that that's a world that's 20 years away. I think it's much closer than that. And so that's a different consideration. But for now, we don't really have that. This is an augmentation, like an incredible augmentation tool. And you can automate workflows and you can do things, but it's humans that are being augmented. So, and I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's how we see things for the next couple of years. But we do think that, and I would recommend that people in the workforce and leaders in particular, like realize that their people probably should be using it more, but it's to achieve what the people are trying to achieve, right? It's still human powered. And the question is like, how much augmentation, how much 10xing happens, for now. I mean, I do think that spectrum, it's like science fiction, like that spectrum it is already starting to change. Whereas like, how much do you sort of let the AI do things? How much do you rely on the AI? And I think it's human powered still.
Well, I think there's a lot there, Adam, just in terms of decision making. If you think about turns in an organization, you're my boss, I propose something to you, you've got to review it, you come back. If we're both augmented and I say, hey, ChatGPT, you know everything about my boss, Adam, you know how he makes decisions. Will you recast this email in a way that's most likely to be persuasive to him, right? And you have an AI that's trained to evaluate Jeremy's proposals. You can imagine even if we just cut the turns in half, we doubled decision velocity, right? And so even in a world where it's only humans being augmented to interact with each other,
I agree.
you see the organization accelerate dramatically.
That's right. Yeah, Andy and I talk about it as like, you ever see that movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper? Like, it's like, I still think that analogy holds. It's like, is everybody just has like a limitless, like, but of everybody, not just one character in the movie, but like what happens when you end up making better decisions faster. And so you think about it, like in most organizations, our jobs are like, we're just like decision-making agents
Yeah. Yeah.
to mix the metaphor.
I have a slightly, I think it's related. I think it addresses this question, but I was watching some YouTube clip. I hear, have you ever heard of YouTube? It's this great new platform.
Amazing. What's the URL?
On YouTube, there was that Tom Brady was on, and he was like talking to a soccer team, and he was describing how every day in practice, he would do the 2-minute drill, and he would be like, I'm going to treat this practice like it's the Super Bowl. And he would do the 2-minute drill, and he'd like, they'd score, and he'd be like, he'd jump up and down, and he got his whole team to treat practice as if it was, that Super Bowl moment. And I think that that's very relevant to this conversation.
That's brilliant. I absolutely agree. Folks don't really see all of the opportunities they are for snaps, as you're saying.
Yes.
Every email in exchange is a snap. Are you treating it like a Super Bowl moment, or are you just casting it off?
Yeah, like it'd be interesting. I've always wondered, this is kind of a tangent, but I've always wondered, what if everything I did in a course of a week, I forced myself to use AI for every single thing I did, which would be really weird because I don't know how you do that. But it'd be interesting because I almost want to try it as an experiment. I have a feeling I would find myself in a weird but better place at the end of the week, which is really weird to say. But but you'd have to force yourself. It's completely unnatural to do that. And yet it would be me prompting and me iterating. So it's still me. Like we're not, again, until the agents become autonomous, truly autonomous, like it's still you prompting and still you interacting and you thinking about how you want to react and how you want to receive the information. So anyways, I think that Tom Brady thing is a good example. I do think and I think that's it's interesting. We've ended on this podcast on a point, which is like, I think in some ways, if that concept, which sounds so weird and almost overly like artificial and inhuman and all that kind of stuff, is the point we want to get across in the book. That is like, you can choose not to do that, or it's okay, but just know that if you did choose to do that, you would probably make better decisions faster all week. And if your whole organization was doing that on a compounded basis every day, every month, like where is your company going to be, right? If that was really, we actually know the answer. Like there's been studies done by Harvard and BCG and Wharton that say you're going to be like 50% faster and 50% higher quality at today's models. And that's insane. If you could get 10%, Michael Dell was on a podcast that Andy sent me. I can't remember.
BG squared.
BG squared. And he was saying the same thing. He's like, look, I'll take 10%. If I can get 10% higher quality and faster decision-making.
He probably read the book. I have,
for sure.
I have one last question and then we'll let you go because we know we're running out of time. But I know, and that you convinced Andy to write a new book, but really what I'm interested in is, what is the kind of like the next thing you guys are pondering about? Like, what's the thing that you might not have the answer for, but where you just have an insane amount of interestingness?
I have two areas that one is the impact of this massive investment and hyperscaling to the overall economy globally and specifically in the US. And that means what does really happen to labor, industry by industry, job title by job title, consumer spend. Like the impact is, there's like a massive gold rush that's being poured into the economy. So there's that. That's one topic. The second topic is the fundamental changing. I mean, you in many ways, your question about organizational structure, really fascinating to me. But what actually happens to the fabric of competition? I compare a lot of what the competition in business in general, I compare a lot of what's happened with AI to suddenly, at least in the US, there's 20 to 40 tools for every industry, every application. And it's like there's competition has been unleashed in massive ways, which hurts margins. And yet, like, what happens as a result of that? So I think business fundamentally changed, and I'm fascinated by that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add is, in Andy and I we've been talking about that. We've also been talking about vibe coding. And it's interesting. It's that term, Andre Karpathy sort of coined that term. It's been around for 6 months or whatever now, but there's something about what's happening with the coding abilities for non-technical people in the last month between Lovable and GPT-5's release, and how it highlighted vibe coding. Andy and I, as we started to try vibe coding some things, it actually opened our mind that, like, it's vibe coding. It takes that problem, that AI problem solving we just said, to like another dimension. That's another thing we're fascinated by, like pulling the thread on that to be like, I think these sort of science fiction ideas of like organizations, not just like rolling their own enterprise software, but like, I'm not a software engineer, but like taking a software engineering approach to non-software problems and actually creating code to sort of help you with those problems. If you can combine a business leader's mind with functional expertise with software development capabilities suddenly, like that's a really weird and interesting combination for propelling an organization forward. And Andy and I are like, we're trying to get our heads around that, which is like a whole other, it's like in the series 3 Body Problem. I don't know if you ever watched those books and that movie, but like the first series is about aliens, maybe coming to Earth or whatever. But then if you hear about what the second and third books are about, you're like, oh my God, like it went in a really weird place around things. And I think that's where the sequel to AI First is going to be, probably, if it was ever literally or figuratively written, going to be about how organizations, they don't just like change their org design. They're not just AI first, but like they're just completely different animals in a way because of the capabilities of AI.
Yeah. There's so much. It's impossible to overstate. I mean, you talk about governance headache or safety headache, right? But I mean, I told Henrik this story the other day. I was working with a company in Latin America, and they had like 10 ideas. We started with, I'm the idea guy, right? So you start with 1,000 ideas, you get down to 10. And before lunch, which is like 3 p.m. there, of course, I said, hey, back of the envelope calculation, how much time and budget do you need to pull these ideas? Not scale across thousands of locations, just like prototype. And the mode response, any guesses? It's like 50K, 8 weeks. That's what everybody said. Roughly 50K in 8 weeks. While they were at lunch, me and my partner built one of the ideas. It's like, and they come back from lunch, we're like, did you mean like this? And you just see, it's like, there's the real time blowing of minds. And then the CIO going, oh no, now you've really screwed me, because now they're going to expect. And you think about every manager who hears a team say it's going to take 10 weeks and they go, great. If a manager doesn't know, they should say, absolutely unacceptable. I'll give you 10 hours. Right. Then he's talking about velocity, right? Then they keep saying, great, 10 weeks. Let me know when you got a prototype. Right.
Yeah, that's right, Jeremy. Like, I know we're at time.
That's a great story.
Yeah. You just said, it's interesting because Andy and I in the book AI First, we're all about like, wow, like the Ironman suit, the 10Xing that Reid Hoffman talks about. This is better decisions faster. But what happens when the execution of the better decision is also at that speed?
Yeah.
Like that's the part, like you're saying, like that's the part that we're trying to get our head around, and is the next chapter.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
I think that's a great place to stop the pot. Really, really appreciating having you on. Okay, Jeremy, interesting conversation, huh?
I thought so. I'm still, my head's kind of spinning there at the end. We were talking about everybody's got a limitless pill.
Yeah.
And I think for all of the hype around agents and for all the hype around, scaling, productivity, stuff like that, the kind of thought exercise we went through at the end, right? Adam's my boss. I'm working for Adam. If I just am able to communicate better with him, and if he's just better able to manage me, understand, or just thinking about the decision velocity in that kind of paired relationship, if you extrapolate it, it doesn't take very much extrapolation to imagine it's not just like a 10% better organization. It's a totally different organization. I want to listen to the BG2 podcast with Michael Dell, because it sounds like he was saying something similar. But to me, it's really profound to think about truly being AI first, truly being augmented. And after we hit pause on the recording, we're talking about maybe we do an AI first challenge where we and our listeners say, hey, all week long, we are going to invite AI into every part of our week. We don't even know what that means really, but even just to shift the frame from, what is AI a fit for, to starting point is we're working with AI for everything and finding ways to do it and then reflecting on that later. I think it's a really powerful reframe actually. So
Yeah, I
I'm
think
pretty
it's also it's
stoked.
interesting when, when you suddenly figure out it breaks, like I was, I'm not sure we talked about it, but like I was wearing one of those little dongles, that records everything. And,
Mm,
I brought it around the family and my wife looked at it and go like, what's that? And I'm like, it's an AI device. I'm testing, I'm recording everything. She's like, no, you're not. And it started like a really interesting kind of conversation about, like in her view, for example, even though this is just for my own use, she thought that was worse than taking a picture and putting it on social, like that,
hmm.
that like the boundary that was broken there. And for me, like, since I was just using it for myself, like, I'm like, it's just me and my AI friend, right?
Right.
So I think it's interesting. Well, the interesting with that experiment is not only obviously what's going to yield in kind of like its active way, what you can use it for, but also like where you find out where you definitely shouldn't use it.
Yeah.
The thing that I really kind of like crystallized for me was I saw a Shopify kind of head of design or something like that that basically says something to extend like, don't ever show me like Figma files or anything. I only want to see prototypes. I only want to see basically where you mocked up a solution for something that you're debating with me. And he
Yeah.
had many other points. And as and that was kind of like, I think the output from my brain of this conversation of like, are we asking our organization to implement AI because we're trying to implement new technology? Or are we trying to really create a new type of behavior, a sense of resourcefulness or a sense of entrepreneurship amongst the people, where organizations have more agency and they are more kind of like they go further in the chain of thinking about something and then executing on it. And I think what was interesting with this kind of example of like, I don't want to see a, and I don't want to see a text. I want to see a picture. I don't want to see a picture. I want to see a presentation. I want to see a presentation. I want to see a
Yeah.
prototype.
Prototype.
That
Yeah.
the prototyping is kind of like now a capability that anybody can actually do. And that
Mhm.
was just not the
Yeah.
case even like a year ago.
This is gonna. I think that I'm predicting folks are gonna enjoy this conversation a lot because you don't know this, Henrik, but we're gonna riff here for another minute or two. Because one thing I've been thinking about is this idea of low res prototyping, and now you can actually high res prototype as quickly as you can low res prototype. Right? It's easy. It's you in Replit. You can build a working app as quickly as you could build a crappy, construction paper pipe cleaner version. Right? And at Stanford, for years, we've been teaching students the merits and values of low resolution prototyping. One reason is speed. Okay. And now you can get high resolution at the same speed, maybe even greater. The other thing, which I would be fascinated to dig into, which I don't think is addressed by, call it the Replits of the world, is your own investment in your solution. When you are working with crappy materials like construction paper, your ego doesn't get attached. Whenever something looks nice, it also changes the customer's perception or the user's perception, right? If it looks nice, I'm talking about colors and button placement. Whereas if it looks crappy, of course, I'm talking about the concept because you couldn't possibly want to launch this, right? And so all of a sudden, we're kind of anchoring differently. And these rapid prototyping tools, I think, will have a different impact on the user, which probably is good because the more realistic or believable the decision, the higher quality of the data point. So I like that. But from a user or from a designer perspective or an innovator perspective, I think part of the challenge is it's really hard to throw away because it looks nice. And I'll give you one simple example. One thing I know to be true, teaching hundreds of professionals now how to use tools like Replit, is that sometimes the best thing to do is open a new window and drop the PRD in and just start over. Because for whatever reason, Replit went down a weird rabbit hole. But what I've noticed is the cognitive load on a human when they see all the work. Yeah, granted, it only took Replit 10 minutes to do this, but it feels like 4 weeks worth of work. Trying to scrap that window feels like throwing away 4 weeks worth of work, not 10 minutes.
Okay, I have two
And
things.
so there's like a weird attachment there. Anyway, I'm kind of riffing. Hit me
no,
back.
but
Come on.
there's two. No, I'm continuing the riff because I'm into it. There's two thoughts. One is there is this kind of like the promiscuousness of making, which is
Yeah.
if you talk to people who are great at using people on Upwork, what they do is they hire 6 people to do the same work, and then they just take the best part and they continue with that person. They're kind of like disposable in the use, which is kind of like weird for most people because they paid somebody to do some work. I think what you're saying there for me is quite profound and has helped me as an entrepreneur a lot. It's like I'm pretty promiscuous when it comes to kind of like concept. I start 2 or 3 things at the same time. And if it doesn't
Yes.
work, I don't dig in harder. I basically go, oh, it didn't work. And then I kind of go to the
Yeah.
next thing. I'm very
Yeah.
inspired by my wife. She used this term. She's a molecular biologist. She used this term like it was non-viable. Like it's not emotional. It just didn't work. Next thing, right? The other thing which I think is interesting that you mentioned was that this thing, what happens when suddenly you can prototype in high fidelity? And you're making the point that it used to be easy for people to basically do something that was kind of shitty looking because then people would focus on the concept. I think the flip side of what you're saying, though, is that now that everything looks like the final product,
Mhm.
the idea suddenly actually matters, right?
The
So
idea is more
people
important than
now has
anything. Yeah.
VO3
Yeah.
and you see these amazing produced videos and you go like, yeah, but it's not funny. Like, it's not interesting. It didn't make me feel anything.
Right.
It basically was like you prompted something that was not a good concept, didn't
The
have an
idea is more
insight.
important than ever. The idea is more important than
That
ever.
is
Yes.
so fascinating also, right? And the same thing, I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of the work that I do now where I do product work is that I used to the same thing. I remember my first, in starting my career, I would use like balsamic mock-up or like I would mock up stuff like in these kind of like wireframey kind of ways. Now, I use, whatever, GPT-5 or Replit, and I basically build whatever I want. And then I give it to an engineer and saying, okay, I know this is like not safe or anything, but like this is roughly what I was looking to do. And then obviously the velocity of then taking that into the cold code base is much faster than having to kind of explain it to somebody, then have to explain it to something, then have to code it. But if it's not working, then it's very clear immediately because it just
Mhm.
doesn't pop right there when you
Mhm.
try to use it.
Yeah, it's really, we talked about a future in this episode and how the future is going to look different, how organizations are going to look different. When it's technically possible to run that many experiments in parallel, you're going to have all sorts of other, call it coordination challenges, which maybe will be solved by AI. But I think folks will only earn the right to have that kind of elevated, abstracted conversation about innovation if they are at the edge of capabilities. Meaning, if they're still writing, as we talked with John Waldman about a few weeks ago, right? If they're still writing 20-page PRD docs and reading 20-page PRD docs, they are going to be 100 times slower. And if they're only building one thing with Replit, they're going to be 100 times worse than if they're building 100 and they're happy to scrap the 99 for the one thing that they wouldn't have discovered had they not done 100 parallel versions, right? But this is the extrapolating to the exponential, in a sense, is a wild way to think about product development, innovation management. And it's now more possible than ever because we're no longer constrained. Going back to the beginning of this conversation, actually, we're no longer constrained by our intelligence. The reason you could not make 10 versions of the landing page is because it takes 10 times as much time. Now it literally takes the same amount of time. To make 10 is to make 1. The only limitation is, do you as the innovator know you should make 10? That's the only difference.
I'll stop us now because we'll soon make the commentary over the podcast.
No,
And-
I mean, folks, hey, how about this? How about the code word? The secret code word this week is Mas Henrik. That's MASHENRIK. Or what's less? Less Henrik. I don't know. I want to
French-
know whether people like more of this kind of conversation or less. So whatever the
Okay.
code word you want to use that tells us whether you want to hear us riffing more or just like get back to the guest, you jokers, let us know.
That's awesome.
As always, thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Prompt. I am your host, Jeremy Utley, alongside my co-host, Henrik Werdelin, and we are delighted to learn alongside you. Until next time, signing off from Copenhagen and La Honda, California. Bye.